All right, let's get started with 5.3 percents, decimals, and fractions. So percents or percent. Okay, so um, I grew up seeing this as one word, but my understanding is in other countries they show it as two words, which I prefer actually because it kind of specifies what exactly we're dealing with, especially if we understand what a cent is, which, if we think about pennies, hopefully that makes a lot more sense. Because how many pennies will make a dollar? Well, you need 100 of them, right? So it's per 100, which also means that it's out of 100. So a percent is really telling you how many hundredths there are. So 86% is telling you that you have 86 hundredths. And we've already seen, if we were to write that in words, would be 86, where the 6, that last value, has to be in the hundredths place value. So 86 hundredths is 0.86. Of course, there's rules that apply to this, but, well, we'll look at those. Yeah, the percents. And we kind of saw that with that last example. What was it? 86%, right? So if you start with a percent and want to get to a decimal, just like we saw in that last example where it was 86%. So the decimal would be technically to the right of the 6. Now, since we're changing this to a percent, we'll get rid of that. But we're going to move the decimal 2 times to the left. Okay, so you got to be careful, like those were written incorrectly. I apologize. Just fix those in your notes if you printed them. And yeah, that would then be 0.86 as a decimal. So 0.86 from that 86%. Okay, now, since decimals to percents is just backwards, instead of moving it to the left, the decimal place, you're just going to move it to the right. So let's say we start with some other decimal, like, it doesn't even matter which one. It could be kind of like a mixed decimal, 1.93. What the heck? So change this decimal into a percent. You're just going to move it 2 times to the right, which would be 193%. Now, again, you may be wondering why we're doing this stuff. Is because 86%, again, it's hundredths, right? 86 hundredths. So the 6 has to be in the hundredths place value, and then we just read it from there, right? So, not that we would say it is 186 hundredths, but if that was a 1 there, then there would be 1. For decimals to percents, since the 3 is the hundredths place value, this tells us how many hundredths or percents there are, and that's 193, right? So we read it without the decimal, and then we just tack on a percent sign at the end. So we read this as 193%. Now, if there's decimals inside of the percent, that's okay. In the homework, it should tell us where to round those two. Now, percents to fractions, like we've seen, we've already changed decimals to fractions and fractions to decimals. So as long as we can get them into one of the formats that we prefer, then we can use those methods to change them to fractions or decimals as needed. Okay, so percents to fractions, we would generally start with changing it into a decimal, right? Like we had 86% in the beginning. Well, we already know that converts to 0.86 as a decimal. And like it says here, you can write the percent over 100, which was, what was it, 86 hundredths? And again, it's over 100 because it's per 100%, okay? And then from here, you're just looking to simplify the fraction, which, well, I would just use a calculator to do that. So 86 hundredths. There you go, 43 fiftieths. And that would be considered fully simplified there. 86% is the same. I said hundredths. Fiftieths. Calculator even said fiftieths. All right, so 43 fiftieths is the same as 86%. percent, but that'd be fully simplified. And that's when it asks for fractions from percents, we always want those simplified. So fractions to percents, convert the fraction to a decimal. So you're going to move it, or convert it into a decimal. And then you should move it 2 places to the right instead. That says left. Should say to the right. Yeah, because we're moving the decimal. To change the decimal to a percent, we'll be moving it to the right. So, whatever fraction you get, you can change it to a decimal. What the heck? You can use 193%. Or no, this one's a fraction to a decimal. So, give myself more space here. So whatever fraction you're starting with, let's start with something a little bit more common like 3/4. A little bit smaller. 3/4, so you just divide these. I just put it into the calculator and get 0.75, right? And then, of course, you're moving the decimal 2 times to the right, which would make that 75%. All right, so 4 different conversions. Again, they need to be equivalent, and this is how you would do it. So the decimal, 0.6, is equivalent to what percent? So this is a decimal to a percent, right? So I'm going to look at that 0.6. And since it's a decimal to a percent, I would just move the decimal 2 times to the right and fill in any blanks with zeros. So now this is 60%. Now, just so we know, the calculator will make this conversion for you, okay? So you could say, I'm going to type in 0.6, okay? 0.6 into the calculator. You can see right above the 9, there's the parenthesis button. And then there's the arrow percent. That means it'll change a decimal to a percent for us if we need it to. So to access that green part, I just need to push second, that parenthesis button above the 9, enter, and it changes it into a percent for me. And it'll do this for any decimal. I think it'll do it for any fraction for us as well. So that confirms that 0.6 is 60%. And again, just to reiterate this, that was 0.60 from the beginning. It just, remember, we don't always show the zeros right there. But we could see this would read as 60 hundredths. And we're always dealing in hundredths when we look at percents. So the decimal 8.3 is equivalent to what percent? So again, we're changing a decimal to a percent. And it doesn't matter which way you look at it, right? 8.3, you could say, well, 8.30. Maybe you're moving the decimal 2 times to the right, which would make that 830%. Now, some of you guys would say, well, I'm just taking the 8.3 and multiplying it by 100, which tells me the percent. That's true as well. It's the same thing as moving the decimal 2 times to the right. So this also would be 830%. It's still correct. Or if you're like, well, I know this 0 here makes it 830 hundredths, which is the percent, still okay. All right, still the same answer. And again, we can put that in the calculator if we wanted to, just to make sure. 8.3 second parenthesis button shows it's going to convert that to a percent, 830%. Bam. All right, 47%. We want this as an equivalent decimal value. So again, changing a percent to a decimal, we're going to move the decimal 2 times to the right. And again, for most percents, it's not going to show a decimal. So we've got to know where it goes. And this will just be 47.0%, I guess. So the decimal just goes after whatever whole value you get, okay? And again, we're moving the decimal 2 times to the left to make this a decimal, 0.47, and bam, there's our decimal. So we saw it in converting decimals to percents, you multiply it by 100. If we're changing a percent to a decimal, you're going to divide by 100. So you take 47 divided by 100, Again, it's the same thing as moving the decimal 2 times to the left, which is the great thing about our number system, is it's based on those base 10 values. Now, will the calculator change a percent to a decimal for us? Yes, it will. If I type in 47, and then second, you can see the other parentheses right above the 8 shows the percent symbol. So if I push second, that parentheses right above the 8, on my calculator it shows 47%. So when I push equals or enter, that will show me the actual decimal for it, 0.47. So there's that one. All right, what if it's a decimal in a percent? Again, the process is the same every time. So we're going to move the decimal 2 times to the left. And again, this would read, without the percent, this would be 0.8 hundredths, right? So we need the 0 to be in the hundredths place. 0 point, again, just filling any empty places with zeros. 008. And we can see the 0 there, this one, is still in the hundredths. You just got 0.8 of those. And once again, the calculator will show this for us, 0.8%, enter, and it does change it into the same decimal for us. The fraction 3/8 is equivalent to what percent? And we'll round to the nearest tenth. That should say tenth of a percent if necessary. That's okay. So 3/8, right? I got 3/8. In your calculator, if you need to type it in as 3 divided by 8, that's fine. But the reason why we would do this is to find the decimal value. Okay, so 3 divided by 8, 3/8, it's going to give us the same value as a decimal. And this is going to give me 0.375. Well, now that I have the decimal, I'm going to do the same thing that we were just doing in changing a decimal to a percent, which is to either multiply it by 100 or just move the decimal 2 times to the right. So I know the decimal goes between the 7 and the 5, making it 37.5, but again, that's a percent, and I already have a tenth of a percent in there. So make sure when it says round the percent to the nearest tenth, it's the percent. So get your percent, and then if this needed rounding, then I would round that to the nearest tenth, but we don't need to in this case. Now, what about the calculator? Will the calculator change a fraction to a percent? I actually don't know, but let's find out. So we're changing a fraction to a percent. So just like we changed the decimal to a percent, second, that parentheses right above the 9, enter, bam, it does. 37.5%. So that one's a good one. What about this fraction? 4/9. Can we change that to a percent? Yes, we can. So again, in my calculator, I would type in 4 divided by 9, because that'll give me the decimal right away. 4 divided by 9 in the calculator is going to give me 0.4 repeating. So we'll show several 4s there, not that it really matters, because we're going to round the percent to the nearest tenth. And to change a decimal to a percent, I'll move the decimal 2 times to the right, which would make that 44 point, the way I have it written, 4.444. But we only need to round this to the nearest tenth, so I find the tenths place, the 4, I look to the right, this next number, the hundredths place value, is less than 5, so we'll just scratch out these other ones, and we keep the 4 of 4, 44.4, again, this is in a percent. And yes, once again, the calculator, even though it's a fraction, will convert that into a percent. And yeah, it shows. It's showing all the 4s there. That's going to repeat forever. Not that it really matters to us, because we're only rounding to the nearest tenth. So on this one, 7.25% into whatever reduced fraction it is. Now, 7.25%, we would say, well, look, you're just going to take the percent and divide it by 100, right? Now, the calculator will give me that as a decimal. I actually don't know what it is. And we could say, well, we're going to change this, divide by 100, and it gives me this decimal. But we don't really want it as a decimal, right? We want it as a fraction. So even as a decimal, let me think how I want to say this. Yeah, whatever. So we'll change it to a decimal first, even though we want the answer as a fraction, because right now I don't want a decimal in the fraction. So if I change this into a decimal, I get 0.0725. But to change this decimal into a fraction like we've already learned, I look at the place value of the 5, right? Well, what is that place value? It's tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. So it really is going to be over 10,000. 1, 2, 3, yeah, 10,000. And then it's 725 of these 10,000ths. And now that there's another way to get rid of the decimal, which we'll look at here in a moment. But if I'm looking at just this fraction to simplify, I'd say, well, I know these are both divisible. I don't know, for me, I'd say 25. And again, the calculator will do that work for you, but what the heck? 725 divided by 25, 29. So it's going to be 29, and then 1,000 divided by 25, 400. And that looks like it's simplified to me, but we'll check here in a moment. The other way, yeah. So the other way to look at it is just to start out with, right? Because you're still going to make it over 100, 7.25 over 100. But now what I would do is I'd say, what, like I just said, we don't want decimals in the fractions. So I would move this decimal 2 times to the right. But again, in order to keep the fraction equivalent, I'd have to take the 100 decimal and move it 2 times to the right, which would give us another 2 zeros there. So this changes into 725 over 10,000 anyways. So it ends up being the same as what we have right here. Divide both these by 25, and you get the 29 400ths. So yeah, is there different ways to do it? Yes, there is, but I still recommend changing this into something over 100, and then if the decimal is necessary, then you could. But like we talked about before, if you said, well, I'm going to change this first into a decimal, into this decimal here, you could do that as well. Of course, I'm going to use the calculator just to make sure I did that right. 7.25%. Yeah. The decimal shows the same one that we have. I'm going to change it to a fraction, though, 29 400ths. So we did that good.